What would you do if your past came back to haunt you, threatening the only thing you've ever loved? A father's love is tested when his daughter is taken by those who betrayed him. Trapped in a dangerous game, Ryan Callaway fights not just for survival, but for justice. The lines between right and wrong blur as a sinister conspiracy unravels. But with every step, the danger grows. Who can he trust in a world built on lies? Before we dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another heart-pounding tale. Don't forget to tap the bell. And if this story resonates with you, leave a like, share, and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to stay connected. Detective Ryan Callaway sat motionless, his hands cuffed in front of him. The orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the badge he once wore with pride. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, thick with tension, as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, but he focused on only one face, the small, tear-streaked face of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, sitting at the back, clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit. He had sworn to protect people, to uphold justice. But today, justice had turned its back on him. The jury finds the defendant, Ryan Callaway, guilty of first-degree murder. The word struck like a hammer to his chest. He did not flinch. He had braced for this, knowing the system had already decided his fate long before the trial began. The perfect framed job, a web of lies so expertly spun that even his closest colleagues had abandoned him. Ballistics matched the bullet to his service weapon. Surveillance footage placed him at the scene. Witnesses, some he had once called brothers in blue, testified against him. The man he was accused of killing, Darius Kemp, was an informant who had gone rogue. Ryan was the last officer assigned to him. It was an airtight case, but the truth was far more sinister. Ryan had spent months in pretrial detention, shouting into deaf ears, knowing someone powerful wanted him silenced. The moment he started digging deeper, they had buried him instead. His best friend, Detective Jason Carter, had nearly lost his badge for daring to question the evidence. The message had been clear: stay silent or suffer the same fate. Now, life in maximum security awaited him. But as the judge's voice cut through the silence, Ryan was not thinking about himself. Does the defendant have any final requests before transfer? Ryan swallowed hard. His voice came out hoarse, raw with pain. Please, just let me hug my daughter one last time. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge, known for his iron-fisted rulings, hesitated. A flicker of humanity passed over his face before he sighed. 3 minutes. The guards hesitated before nodding. Lily's small frame trembled as they led her forward. Ryan's breath hitched as they unlocked his cuffs. Just for this moment. Just for her. And then she was in his arms. She clung to him, her little fingers digging into the rough fabric of his jumpsuit. He pressed a kiss to her curls, inhaling the faint scent of her shampoo, a scent that felt like home. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I love you so much. You're going to be okay." But Lily shook her head violently, her whole body trembling. Then, in the smallest, most fragile voice, she whispered words that turned his blood to ice. "Daddy, if you don't stop him, he'll hurt me too." Ryan's entire body went rigid. His heart pounded against his ribs. He gently pulled back, just enough to look into her eyes, wide, frightened, desperate. Something was very, very wrong. A cold dread slithered through him. This was not just about him anymore. He had been framed. He had been silenced. And now, someone was coming for his daughter. A silent, violent fury ignited inside Ryan Callaway as his grip instinctively tightened for just a fraction of a second before he forced himself to let go. His pulse pounded in his ears as his eyes scanned Lily's face, then her arms, her neck. Then he saw it, a faint bruise, barely visible beneath the sleeve of her dress. His world narrowed. Lily had just given him the first clue in a case he did not even know he was working. His mind was racing, but he forced his voice to stay calm. "Who, Lily?" he murmured. "Who told you that?" Lily's lip trembled. She hesitated. as if she was trying to find the courage to say it aloud. But before she could answer, the bailiffs yanked him back. "Time's up." "No. No, wait." Ryan twisted against their grip, but they were already dragging him away, wrenching him from her grasp. Lily was in danger. He fought against them, desperate for just a few more seconds. His eyes locked onto hers. "Stay with Uncle Jason, baby, you hear me?" His voice was urgent, commanding. "Stay with him." Lily nodded frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. But then, slam. The door shut. The sound was final, like a coffin ceiling shut. The moment Ryan stepped inside those prison walls, it felt like they were closing in on him. But it was not the weight of his conviction that pressed down on him. It was a suffocating realization that his daughter was in danger, and no one cared. For the past 48 hours, Ryan had done everything in his power to raise the alarm. He demanded to speak to child welfare, to a detective, to anyone who would listen. Every plea was met with the same cold indifference. You lost your right to be concerned about that little girl the second you put a bullet in Darius Kemp's head. Ryan wanted to tear the bars from the walls. He had taken down killers, human traffickers, drug lords. He had spent his entire career fighting to protect the innocent. But now, his own daughter needed protecting, and no one would listen to them. He was nothing more than a convicted murderer grasping at straws. A liar, a manipulator, a desperate man who would say anything to save himself. But this was not about him. This was about Lily. Someone had framed him. Someone had stolen his freedom. And now they were coming after his little girl. Ryan clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. His mind was a battlefield, racing through every case he had worked, every criminal he had put away. Who had done this? Who had gone to such extraordinary lengths to take him down? And how far would they go to keep their secrets buried? Across the city, Detective Jason Carter was not sleeping. The dim glow of his desk lamp flickered as he sifted through stacks of old case files. His suspension had sidelined him, but it had also given him one advantage. No one was watching him anymore. For weeks, he had been piecing together the truth behind Ryan's conviction. Ryan had been right. This was not just a frame job. This was a calculated execution. Someone inside the department had wanted Kemp dead, and they needed Ryan to take the fall. But why? Jason tapped his pen against his desk, staring at the timeline of events pinned to the wall. There was a glaring gap, a void where eyewitness testimony should have been. But no one had come forward. Not a single person in that building had seen anything, or at least, that was what they claimed. Jason exhaled sharply and reached for an old contact book. If the official witness list had nothing, he needed to look somewhere off the record. His fingers stopped on a name: Vanessa Green, a bartender, an informant, and someone who had mysteriously disappeared shortly after Kemp's murder. If anyone knew something, it was her. The rundown motel on the outskirts of the city reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap liquor. The neon sign flickered above, casting an eerie red glow across the parking lot. Room 214. Jason knocked. No answer. He knocked again, more forcefully this time. "Vanessa, it's Jason Carter." The door cracked open just an inch. A pair of wide, terrified eyes stared back at him. "Go away," Vanessa whispered. Jason shoved his foot against the door before she could slam it shut. "I just need to talk." Her gaze darted down the hallway. Someone was watching, and Jason knew, in that moment, he was getting too close to the truth. Paranoia was etched into every movement. Vanessa looked thinner than Jason remembered, jittery, her once vibrant expression now hollowed out by fear. "You do not get it," she hissed, voice sharp and urgent. "I cannot help you. You should not be here." Jason pulled out his badge. Not that it carried much weight anymore, but it was a reminder of who he was, of what he stood for. "Ryan Callaway was convicted of murder," he said, voice steady. "You and I both know he did not do it." Vanessa flinched at the name, her fingers trembling against the doorframe. Jason took a careful step forward, lowering his voice. If you know something, now is the time to talk." She swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked around the parking lot, scanning the shadows, as if someone could be watching. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she stepped back and let him in. Inside, the motel room was a disaster. Half-packed suitcases, scattered papers, clothes thrown across the bed in chaos. Like she had been preparing to run. Jason kept his voice even. "Who are you running from, Vanessa?" She let out a shuddering breath. "The same people you are trying to expose." Jason's stomach dropped. Vanessa wrung her hands, pacing. Then, her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I was in Darius Kemp's building that night." Jason's pulse quickened. "I saw who went in before the shots were fired." Jason took a step closer. "It was not Callaway, was it?" Vanessa shook her head. His blood ran cold. "Then who?" Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut, fear tightening her features. And when she spoke, her voice trembled. "Two officers," she whispered. "I saw them go inside." The room felt like it had lost all its oxygen. Jason knew what this meant. Ryan had been right. This was bigger than a framed job. This was a cover-up and execution. But Vanessa was not done. Her entire body shook as she turned away, walked to the bedside table, and pulled out a burner phone. She scrolled through her messages and then, with a trembling hand, showed Jason the screen. He read the words once, then twice. His hand started shaking. "If Callaway does not stop fighting his conviction, we will make sure his little girl disappears." A sickening weight crushed Jason's chest. Lily. This was not just about silencing Ryan anymore. They had leverage, and they were going to use it. Jason shot to his feet. "We have to move. Now." Vanessa took a step back. "I cannot." Jason grabbed her shoulders. His voice was firm, urgent. "Listen to me. This is not just about you anymore. They have already taken Callaway. Now, they are coming for his daughter." Vanessa's breath hitched. That hesitation was all Jason needed. "You are going into protective custody," he said, already pulling out his phone. "But first, I need to get to Lily." He dialed Lily's school. It rang. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He was already moving, sprinting out of the motel room toward his car. "Stay here. Do not answer the door for anyone but me," he ordered. Vanessa nodded, face pale with fear. Jason threw the car into gear, tires screeching against the asphalt as he sped toward Lily's school. She had to be there. She had to be. 10 minutes. That was all he needed. But then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. A voice, low and mocking, slid through the receiver. "You are too late." The line went dead. Hashtag the vanishing. Jason Carter stood in front of the elementary school, hands clenched into fists. The air around him was heavy, suffocating. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Just a handful of cars remained as the last of the teachers locked up for the evening. But Lily should have been here. Instead, the front office staff had been oddly dismissive when he demanded answers. Her mother picked her up early, they had said. Jason's stomach twisted. Lily did not have a mother. He had pushed harder, flashing his badge even though it meant nothing now. The receptionist barely looked up. "Sir, the paperwork checks out. A guardian signed her out an hour ago." Jason had grabbed the sign-out sheet, scanning for a name. Nothing. No signature. Just a scribbled line where a name should have been. That was when Jason understood. This was not a mistake. It was deliberate. Someone inside the system had helped them take Lily. Hashtag the cover-up. Back at the precinct, the case moved at a crawl. The disappearance of a detective's daughter should have triggered every alarm. Instead, Jason watched as the officers in charge did the bare minimum. Reports were filed. A few questions were asked, but no one canvassed the area. No BOLO was issued. No Amber Alert went out. It was all for show. Jason had worked alongside these men for years. He had trusted them, and now he could see the truth. Some of them were not on his side. The department was infected, and whoever had framed Ryan was not just covering up a murder. They were cleaning up loose ends. Jason gritted his teeth. Lily was leverage. They had taken her to keep Ryan silent, but they had just made a mistake, because Jason Carter was done playing by their rules. If they wanted to cover their tracks, he was going to set the whole damn city on fire to expose them, and he was going to get Lily back, no matter what it took. Hashtag, the story is just getting started. Who is behind Ryan Callaway's downfall? And could they be the same people who took Lily? Drop a like if you're ready for the truth, because this story is far from over. Keep watching. They did not just want Ryan Callaway locked away. They wanted him broken. This was never just about framing a cop. It was about crushing him, making sure he never fought back again. Jason Carter would not let that happen. The motel standoff. Across town, in a dimly lit motel room, Vanessa Green sat on the edge of a stained mattress, her fingers trembling as she flicked the ash off her cigarette. Her once steady hands shook with the weight of her decision. She had agreed to testify, agreed to speak the truth, but every instinct in her body screamed that this was a death sentence. Jason studied her carefully. She looked pale, exhausted, jittery. He could not blame her. The second she stepped into that courtroom, she would become a walking target. But they had no other choice. Lily was missing. Time was slipping away. "Are you sure about this?" Jason asked, his voice steady but firm. Vanessa let out a dry, humorless laugh. "No, but if I don't talk, a little girl disappears. And I am not living with that on my conscience." Jason nodded, running a hand over his face. He had played every card he had left, called in the last of his favors. By morning, they had an emergency hearing in front of the only judge who had not been bought. If Vanessa testified, if she could prove that Ryan was not the killer, the entire case would explode from the inside. It would not just exonerate Ryan. It would expose the rot buried deep inside the department. Jason checked his gun and scanned the parking lot through the grimy motel blinds. They needed to move. "Pack a bag," he said, turning back to her. "We are leaving in 5. Vanessa had barely reached for her purse when the first gunshot ripped through the door. The room erupted in chaos. Wood splintered, glass shattered. The acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air. Jason moved on instinct, grabbing Vanessa and yanking her to the floor as bullets tore through the walls. "Stay down," he barked, drawing his weapon. The door blasted open, and 3 masked figures stormed in. Jason fired first, 2 quick, precise shots. One of them dropped instantly, blood pooling beneath him. The other 2 scattered, one flipping over the motel dresser for cover, the other firing blindly into the room. Jason pressed Vanessa to the ground, shielding her with his body. "Back door," he whispered. "When I say go, you run." Her breathing was ragged, terrified, but she nodded. Another shot whizzed past, punching a hole through the cheap motel lamp. Jason fired back, forcing the shooters to take cover. This was their chance. "Go!" Vanessa bolted for the back exit, Jason right behind her. They crashed through the door into the alley, running full speed toward the crowded streets. No car, no backup, no plan except survival. Bullets whizzed past them, shattering glass behind them, but they kept running. They sprinted into a busy intersection, disappearing into a sea of people. Behind them, the masked men hesitated. Too many witnesses. Too much risk. Jason knew what that meant. They were done playing games. Whoever was behind this was no longer just covering their tracks. They were tying up loose ends. And Jason and Vanessa were next. The cage. Inside Brighton Maximum Security Prison, Ryan Callaway sat on his cot, his hands clasped tightly, his jaw clenched. Waiting, he knew Jason would come through. Jason was the only one left who believed in him. But then, the guards arrived. They yanked him off his cot, dragging him through the corridors. The air stank of sweat and cigarette smoke. They threw him into a dimly lit interrogation room. Ryan looked up, locking eyes with the warden. Cold, unreadable. "You should sit down, Callaway." Ryan did not move. His gut twisted. The warden exhaled slowly before speaking. "Your daughter is missing." The words hit like a bullet. For a moment, the world blurred. Silence stretched. Then rage. Ryan lunged. His entire body became a force of fury. It took 3 guards to restrain him, slamming him against the table. "Where is she?" he roared. The warden barely flinched. Ryan struggled, his body shaking with pure rage. "Where is my daughter?" No one answered. One of the guards struck him hard in the ribs with a baton, pain exploding through his body. Ryan collapsed to the floor, gasping, but he did not care. Pain meant nothing. All he could see was Lily, alone, scared, somewhere out there, and he was locked in a cage, unable to do a damn thing. The guards dragged him down the corridor. His ears were ringing, his vision blurred. Then the heavy metal door to solitary confinement swung open. The cell was small, dark, suffocating. The walls closed in around him. Ryan sank to the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But his mind was clear. They thought they could break him. They had no idea who they were dealing with, because Ryan Callaway was done waiting. And the next time they saw him, hell would follow. Ryan Callaway did not pray for himself. He did not pray for justice. He prayed for her, for Lily, his little girl, his only reason for breathing. And in that moment, a single vow burned itself into his soul. No matter what it took, no matter what he had to do, he was getting out, and he was going to find her. The cage. The walls of Brighton maximum security prison had never felt tighter. Ryan sat on the cold concrete floor of his solitary confinement cell, his back pressed against the freezing stone. His mind was a battlefield of rage, fear, and desperation. He had spent years putting criminals behind bars. Now, he was the one rotting in a cage. But it was not his fate that consumed him. Lily was out there, alone, afraid, and he was useless in here. A metal tray scraped against the ground as it was shoved through the small slot in the door. Stale bread, watery soup, a meal unfit for even the worst men he had locked away. He ignored it. His body was exhausted, but his mind refused to rest. The walls blurred around him, closing in like a vice. Ryan had been trained for pressure, for life or death moments. He knew how to keep his composure, how to think logically even in the worst of crises. But this was not a case. This was his daughter. He took a deep, steadying breath. It did nothing to calm him. Jason was out there. Jason would not stop. But was that enough? Ryan clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. No, it was not. The journalist. Across town, in a cluttered office filled with case files and unanswered questions, Hannah Rees leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The dim room smelled of stale coffee and printer ink, the air heavy with the weight of a journalist who had spent her career digging for the truth. Now, she was looking at Jason Carter with something dangerously close to pity. "You are asking me to go up against the entire Brighton PD," she said. "Corrupt or not, they do not play fair. You, of all people, should know that." Jason exhaled sharply. "I am not asking you to go up against them. I am asking you to expose them." Hannah's gaze did not waver. "And you think I have not been trying? You think I have not had cops parked outside my house at 2 a.m? You think I have not had sources vanish?" Jason ran a hand through his hair, frustration tightening his jaw. "I have a witness, a woman who saw who really killed Darius Kemp. She is willing to testify." Hannah's expression shifted. Jason pressed on. "They are covering up a murder. They are burying evidence. And they kidnapped a child, Hannah." His voice dropped. "Lily Callaway. She is 7 years old." Hannah exhaled slowly. Jason could see it now. The exact moment when she crossed a line from skeptical to furious. But then she said something that made his stomach sink. "If we expose them now, they will kill her before we ever find her." Jason's jaw tightened. "You need more than a witness," Hannah continued. "You need something so big, so undeniable, that they cannot sweep it under the rug." Her voice was steady, cold, and right now, you do not have that. Jason's hands curled into fists. "So what do we do?" Hannah leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with something sharp and dangerous. "We set a trap, the Kingpin, inside Brighton Maximum Security Prison." Ryan Callaway was about to make a deal with the devil. The moment they dragged him out of solitary, he knew something had shifted. The guards did not speak to him, did not even look at him. They tossed him back into general population without a word, leaving him in the belly of the beast. He barely had time to steady himself before a shadow loomed over him. Trey Ghost Johnson, a legend in the Brighton underworld, a former gang leader turned prison kingpin, his body a canvas of scars, each one a violent story. Ghost smirked as he sank onto the bench across from Ryan, tilting his head slightly as he studied him. "You look like hell, Callaway." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I do not have time for games, Johnson. What do you want?" Ghost leaned in, lowering his voice. "You and we got a common enemy." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "The same bastard who set you up," Ghost continued, "is the one who put me in here. Only difference is, you got framed for a murder you did not commit. Me, I got set up for a crime I actually did." He chuckled darkly. "One they ordered me to do. Then, when I was not useful anymore, they tossed me aside." Ryan's stomach twisted. He had spent years locking away criminals like Ghost. But now, he needed him. Ghost leaned back, watching Ryan carefully. "You want your kid back? You want out of here? Then we need to help each other. Because trust me, Callaway." His grin was razor sharp. "They do not expect us to work together." Ryan stared at him. His pulse pounded in his ears. He was about to cross a line he could never uncross. But for Lily, for her, he would cross every damn line in existence and burn anyone who stood in his way. This was not just another obstacle to overcome. It wasn't about threats to neutralize or problems to fix. No, this was something far darker, far more dangerous. Ryan had spent years drowning in a world of lies, but now, in the midst of his prison's steel walls, he was being offered something more, a chance to finally understand the nightmare. Ghost, a man with a twisted sense of survival, knew more than he let on. "I know who's pulling the strings, Callaway." Ghost's voice was a dry rasp, heavy with secrets. "I know why they needed Kemp dead, and I know why they took your daughter." Ryan's breath hitched, though he fought to keep his face impassive. "Then why are you telling me this?" he asked, his tone tight with suspicion. Ghost's chuckle was devoid of humor, just a sharp, bone-chilling sound that echoed in the empty space between them. "Because I don't plan on dying in here. And you, Callaway, you're my ticket out." Ryan's fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms as Ghost's words cut through him. "If you know so much, why haven't you used it to free yourself?" Ryan asked, barely containing the anger rising in his chest. The smirk that played across Ghost's face was cold, calculated. "Information's not enough, Callaway. You know how it works in here. A rat doesn't last long enough to see the outside. I need the right kind of help. Someone desperate. Someone with nothing left to lose." His words hit like a punch, knocking the air from Ryan's chest. The truth of it settled in the pit of his stomach, bitter and undeniable. Ryan fought to steady his breath, hating that Ghost was right. His life had been reduced to rubble. Everything he cared about ripped away in an instant. Revenge was all he had left. Ghost leaned closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "Help me get my revenge, Callaway, and I'll get you out of here. We both get what we want." Ryan didn't hesitate, but the decision weighed on him like a lead weight. He stared at Ghost for a long moment, every part of him screaming to resist, but his heart pounded with the urgency of it all. Finally, he extended his hand. Ghost's grin widened, a dark satisfaction in his eyes. "That's what I thought." The air grew thick with the stench of sweat and fear as the riot erupted. The prison's maximum security unit became a boiling cauldron of chaos. Ryan kept his head low, pulse thundering in his ears as prisoners fought tooth and nail, old grudges flaring up in the heat of the moment. Guards scrambled, but the violence spread like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Through the madness, Ryan moved with purpose, his mind focused solely on one thing: escape. Ghost appeared beside him, slipping through the frenzy like a shadow, unfazed by the carnage unfolding around him. "You good, Callaway?" Ghost muttered, barely glancing at him as they weaved through the mayhem. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't break stride. "Just keep moving." They reached a heavy steel door, concealed behind a stack of crates. Ghost shoved against it, straining with effort until it gave way just enough for them to slip through. On the other side, the dimly lit maintenance corridor stretched out before them, its walls cracked and stained with years of neglect. The tunnel below, Ghost explained, was a forgotten piece of the prison's old infrastructure, an underground drainage system that few knew about. Ryan hesitated only for a moment before stepping into the tunnel, his mind still spinning with uncertainty. He didn't trust Ghost, not in the slightest, but right now trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Lily's face haunted him, driving him forward. He had to find her. He had to make them pay. "You're not coming?" Ryan asked, confusion creeping into his voice. Ghost lingered at the entrance, his expression unreadable. "I've got unfinished business," he said, cracking his knuckles and rolling his shoulders with a quiet menace. "You go do what you gotta do, Callaway. I'll take care of mine." Ryan's eyes narrowed, but he gave a single nod before disappearing into the tunnel's dark depths. The air was thick with mildew, the dampness seeping into his clothes as he moved swiftly through the narrow passage. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the emptiness, sharp and steady. But it wasn't long before the sound of boots pounding the ground reached his ears, closer than he wanted. "They're after me," he muttered under his breath, his pace quickening. The guards had found the tunnel. The chase was on. Ryan pushed forward, his heart hammering in his chest as the guards' voices rang out from behind. He could feel the pressure building with every step, the walls closing in as the tunnel twisted and turned in sharp corners, forcing him to react in an instant. There was no room for hesitation. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, its light erratic and wild. The first guard lunged at him, shouting orders, but Ryan was faster. Without a second thought, he closed the distance in a blur. His hands moved like lightning, grabbing the guard's wrist and twisting until he heard the sickening crack of bone. The guard screamed in pain, his baton clattering to the ground. Ryan didn't give him a chance to recover. He drove a knee into the guard's stomach, sending him staggering backward, before slamming an elbow into the back of his head. The man crumpled to the floor unconscious. More footsteps echoed from further down the tunnel, the sound of the guards closing in. Ryan didn't waste time. He sprinted ahead, weaving through the labyrinth of tunnels, knowing the chase had only just begun. But the tunnel wasn't as empty as he'd hoped. Sections had collapsed over the years, forcing him to maneuver around debris and obstacles. The walls seemed to close in with every turn. He could feel the guards gaining on him, their voices growing louder, the sound of their boots a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this hellish race. But Ryan Callaway was a man on a mission, and nothing was going to stop him from reaching the end. Ryan Callaway was running out of time. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, and the weight of the world seemed to crash down on him with every step he took. Sweat stung his eyes, but he kept moving. The sharp scent of rust and oil thick in the air as he squeezed past a rusted maintenance gate. A split second later, gunfire erupted behind him. Bullets whizzed through the air, ricocheting off the metal pipes, sending sparks flying in the dim, claustrophobic passage. He ducked low, instinct kicking in, forcing his legs to carry him even as every muscle in his body screamed for relief. His lungs burned from the exertion, but stopping was never an option. The voices of the guards were growing louder, their boots pounding closer, their shouts growing more desperate. Up ahead, light. The exit. Ryan's blood surged with adrenaline. Every fiber of his being pushed him to go faster. Ignoring the sharp pain of the stitch in his side, the cramp in his legs, the overwhelming exhaustion, he reached the end of the tunnel. There, an old maintenance grate covered a ladder leading up to the outside world. Without a second thought, he jumped onto the rungs, climbing with everything he had left. His arms burned, but he gritted his teeth and climbed faster. Every movement a desperate fight for freedom. Below him, the first guard arrived at the ladder's base, his boots skidding to a halt. "He's going up," he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Ryan didn't look down. His focus was on the hatch above. His fingers grasped the rusted latch, pulling with every ounce of strength left in him. It groaned in protest, but it didn't budge. The sound of boots clanging against metal grew louder. The guards were climbing, desperation in their every movement. Ryan braced himself, pressing one foot against the ladder and throwing his full weight into the latch. It snapped open with a screech that seemed to echo through the tunnel, reverberating through Ryan's chest. He shoved the hatch aside, but just as he pulled himself up, a hand shot out from below, grabbing his ankle with a vice-like grip. Panic surged, but Ryan twisted violently, slamming his boot down with all his might. The guard howled in pain as his grip loosened, just long enough for Ryan to kick himself free. He scrambled the rest of the way up onto solid ground, gasping for air, the sweet taste of freedom within his grasp. But then, a floodlight sliced through the darkness, cutting him off. "Freeze!" a voice commanded, sharp and authoritative. Ryan didn't have a moment to think. He dove to the ground, barely missing the shot that rang out, the bullet whizzing by his head with mere inches to spare. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The hunt was on. Just then, headlights flashed at the mouth of the alley. A car screeched to a halt, its back door flying open. "Get in!" a voice shouted. Ryan didn't hesitate. His feet hit the asphalt, his lungs burning as he sprinted for the car. He threw himself into the back seat, and before the door even closed, the car peeled out, tires screeching against the pavement. The city blurred past in streaks of neon light, but all Ryan could focus on was the mission. The sirens still wailed in the distance, but he was free for now. Jason Carter, the driver, gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity. The car swerved through traffic, each turn a calculated risk. But Ryan barely noticed. His eyes were focused on the only thing that mattered, his daughter. The silence in the car was heavy. Jason's eyes remained fixed on the road, but Ryan could feel the tension. It was palpable, like a storm building just under the surface. His fist clenched as he turned to Jason. "Where is she?" he demanded, voice tight with fear and determination. Jason's jaw tightened, but his tone remained calm. "We don't know yet," he said, his eyes never leaving the road. "But we're going to find her. I swear to you." Ryan's breath came in shallow bursts. He had escaped, but that was only the beginning. Now, he was going to war. The world thought Ryan Callaway was just a desperate fugitive. The news painted him as a disgraced cop, a man on the run with nothing left to lose. His mugshot flashed across every major outlet. Warnings splashed across the screen. Armed and dangerous. But Ryan didn't care about their lies. Let them think what they wanted. As far as he was concerned, there was only one truth. His daughter was out there, and he was going to get her back. In the back seat of the car, the city streets of Brighton seemed to close in on him. Each familiar corner, every alleyway, every passing traffic light was a potential threat. Someone could recognize him. A patrol car could pull up at any second. The hunt could end before it even began. Jason kept his eyes forward, his grip still tight on the wheel. The air in the car was thick with sweat, exhaustion, and adrenaline. In the front seat, investigative journalist Hannah Rees scrolled through her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "They've issued a city-wide manhunt," she said, her voice calm but grim. "Brighton PD is offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to your capture." Ryan let out a sharp exhale, shaking his head. "They're moving fast. Too fast." Jason's voice was low, but the steel in it was unmistakable. "Someone high up is pushing this hard." Ryan's eyes narrowed as the weight of the situation sank in. "Because they need me gone. They need me out of the picture. Before I get to Lily." Jason's hands gripped the wheel even tighter, his knuckles turning white. The tension between them was unbearable. The stakes had never been higher. Hannah turned toward Ryan, her gaze steady. "Before we do anything, you need to know something. What's happening, it goes beyond your conviction. It's bigger than you." Ryan's mind raced, but his voice was a steady calm as he leaned forward. "I don't care how big it is. I only care about my daughter." Hannah nodded, understanding the depth of his resolve. "Who's behind this, Ryan, is the key to getting her back." Ryan met her gaze, a fire in his eyes. "Tell me everything." The car pulled into a small, underground garage beneath an abandoned auto shop, one of Jason's old safe spots. They had to stay off the radar. As soon as the car was parked, they moved swiftly inside, locking the door behind them. Hannah spread a stack of files across a dusty table. She flipped through them quickly, each page revealing more secrets than Ryan was prepared for. What they uncovered would change everything. Ryan Callaway's heart raced, but his mind was sharp. The weight of the moment pressed on him as the world seemed to hold its breath. Sitting in the dimly lit room with Jason Carter and investigative journalist Hannah Rees, he couldn't afford to let his emotions take over. His daughter, Lily, was out there. He could feel her presence in the pit of his stomach, a constant pull, a driving force that wouldn't let him rest. Hannah was flipping through pages with precise efficiency, each turn of the paper adding weight to their shared burden. "We've been working off Vanessa Green's testimony." She began, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent of tension. "She saw the two officers who killed Darius Kemp the night he was murdered." Jason folded his arms across his chest and exhaled sharply, the frustration clear in his eyes. "But she was too afraid to talk because they threatened her life." Ryan's eyes flicked to the thick file Hannah was pulling open. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick with suspense. "So who are they?" he asked, his voice tight. Hannah didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her fingers brushing over the top of the file as if bracing herself for the revelation. She turned the folder around, and Ryan's stomach tightened as his eyes landed on the two photographs clipped inside. "Captain Greg Wallace," Hannah said, her voice low. "Lieutenant Eric Monroe." Ryan's breath caught in his chest. "Wallace," he murmured, barely able to get the word out. Jason nodded grimly. "He led the case against you. He's the reason you were convicted." Ryan's fist curled at his sides, the familiar heat of anger rising in him. Wallace had been the lead investigator, the one who found the ballistics evidence, the one who testified that Ryan had motive, the one who stood in court and looked him in the eye and lied, claiming the evidence was airtight. Now Ryan understood why he had built his entire career working side by side with corrupt men and never even realized it. Hannah continued, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Wallace and Monroe weren't acting alone. They were protecting someone powerful. Ryan's pulse quickened. Who? Hannah slid another file forward. Ryan's eyes locked onto the name stamped across the front. Victor Langley. Ryan's mind reeled. Who the hell is he? Jason sat down at the table's edge, his face tense. Langley's not just some rich guy. He's a power broker. Real estate, investments, law enforcement contracts. He's got his hands in everything. He's been backing Wallace and several high-ranking officers for years. Ryan's blood ran cold. And he is Lily. Hannah nodded, her expression resolute. We have reason to believe so. Jason pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly as he opened a security still from a school parking lot. This was taken the day she went missing, he said, pointing to a dark vehicle in the background. See the van? That's a private security firm. No known contracts with BPD, no connection to the school district. But we ran a deep search. Ryan's stomach knotted as he stared at the image. Jason looked up, his expression grim. That firm is owned by Langley's company. Ryan's hands tightened into fists. The pieces were falling into place. His conviction, the murder of Darius Kemp, the corruption inside the department, and now his daughter. It was all connected. Langley wanted him out of the way. Ryan muttered under his breath. He wanted me gone. Jason's voice was low but firm. And he succeeded. He put you in a cage, and now with you on the run, the whole city's looking for you. If you go anywhere near Langley, he'll use that to his advantage. Ryan's jaw clenched, his mind racing. Then I won't go near him. I'll go through him. Jason hesitated, reading the determination in Ryan's eyes. There was no talking him down now. Ryan was already on a path, and nothing was going to stop him. We need a plan, Jason said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Ryan paced the room, his mind working quickly. We can't storm the place, he said, his voice sharp. Not with Lily inside. Jason nodded, the reality settling in. Langley's estate is a fortress. Private security, cameras, gated entry. Even if we get past that, we don't know where they're keeping her. Hannah tapped her fingers on the table, deep in thought. Then you need to become someone Langley doesn't see coming. Ryan turned to her, his brow furrowing. How? She leaned forward, lowering her voice as she spoke. We make you a ghost, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. You don't go in as Ryan Callaway, the fugitive. You go in as something else entirely. Jason's gaze shifted, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. A shadow. Ryan's mind raced. He had spent years working as a detective, but this was different. He wasn't an undercover agent. This would be dangerous, and if he got caught, no, that wasn't an option. I'm going in, Ryan said firmly, his voice unyielding. And I'm getting my daughter back. Jason exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. Then let's get to work. The hunt had begun. The night was silent, but Ryan Callaway knew better than to trust it. From their vantage point across the dense tree line, he and Jason had a clear view of Victor Langley's estate, a sprawling, modernized fortress on the outskirts of Brighton. It loomed like a castle, built with precision and power, with armed guards at every entrance, motion-triggered floodlights, and a state-of-the-art surveillance system that left no room for error. Jason adjusted the infrared binoculars, letting out a slow breath. This place is locked down tight, he muttered. And Langley's got mercenaries, ex-military, maybe even government-trained. Ryan barely heard him. His body was wound tight, his pulse hammering in his skull. He didn't care how many men were inside. His daughter was in there, and nothing else mattered. Jason must have seen the fire in his eyes because he lowered the binoculars and turned to him. Ryan, we have to do this smart. Rushing and get you killed. And Lily, I know, Ryan said, his voice clipped but calm. He had to stay controlled. It was the only thing keeping him from going in guns blazing. His mind raced, mapping out an infiltration strategy. He had spent 18 years in law enforcement, including tactical operations and undercover work. He knew how security systems worked, where the weak spots were, how to move unseen. He studied the guards' patrol patterns, tracking their rotations. The estate had blind spots. Every security system did. The cameras had dead zones between sweeps, and the guards, despite their training, followed predictable paths. Jason tapped his earpiece. Hannah, how's it looking? Hannah's voice crackled through the comms. I'm in their security feeds. Motion sensors on the east and south sides. The West Garden's your best entry point, least coverage. Ryan exhaled sharply. That's my way in. Jason hesitated, still not fully convinced. I still don't like you going in alone. Ryan met his gaze unwavering. I need you watching the cameras and causing a distraction when I need it. Jason grimaced but nodded. All right, just don't get yourself killed. Ryan secured his weapons, sliding a tactical knife into his boot and adjusting the black hoodie over his head. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the darkness, the hunt continuing. The night air was thick with tension as Ryan Callaway moved like a shadow through the darkness. The distant hum of security systems and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat, the only sounds he could focus on. The mission wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Lily, his daughter, who was trapped in the cold grasp of Victor Langley, a man whose power extended far beyond the law. It was a night of reckoning, and Ryan would do whatever it took to get her back. Each movement was deliberate, calculated. The guards he took down were mere obstacles, human barriers between him and his daughter. His body moved instinctively, almost mechanically. As a former detective, he was used to danger, but tonight was different. His rage was an undercurrent, a current he kept in check, focusing every ounce of his energy on the task at hand, rescuing Lily. Revenge would come later. He was inside Langley's estate now, his rage simmering, controlled, waiting for the right moment to strike. The sprawling mansion, encased in black glass and steel, was more fortress than home. Armed guards patrolled every corner, their movements synchronized with the precision of trained professionals. But they weren't enough to stop someone like Ryan. He had been trained for this. He was ready. As Ryan pressed himself into the shadows, the voices reached his ears. His breath hitched when he recognized one of them. Captain Greg Wallace, the man who had condemned him to prison, the man who had been part of the plan to destroy him. This situation is getting out of hand. Wallace's voice was harsh, impatient. The man escaped a maximum security prison. We should have put him down when we had the chance. Ryan's stomach twisted, but he pressed on, creeping closer, silent as a ghost. Langley's smooth voice followed, a venomous calmness threading his words. Callaway has no power. He's a fugitive with a target on his back. If he's stupid enough to come here, we'll handle him ourselves. The words hung in the air, cold and calculating. Ryan's grip on his knife tightened, his knuckles turning white. But it was the next part of the conversation that made his blood run cold. And the girl? Wallace asked, his voice colder now. Langley sighed, like the matter was beneath him. She's leverage. If Callaway doesn't surrender himself soon, we'll make him. Ryan felt the weight of those words sink into him, like a dagger twisting into his heart. They had never planned on letting Lily go. The realization hit him hard. He was racing against time, and the people who had taken her, who had taken so much from him, would stop at nothing to destroy him. He moved quickly, silently, through the halls. He was close. Then he heard it. The sound that nearly shattered his resolve. A small, trembling voice. Daddy. It was Lily. His heart surged as he followed the sound, reaching a locked door at the far end of the mansion. His fingers moved with expert precision as he picked the lock, the cold metal clicking open. And there she was, Lily, his baby girl. She threw herself into his arms, sobbing. I knew you'd come, she whispered between sobs, her small body trembling in his embrace. Ryan held her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. There was no time to waste. He knelt to her level, his voice soft but firm. Baby, we have to be very quiet, okay? She nodded, wiping her tear-streaked face. Ryan scooped her up into his arms, moving swiftly and quietly, his mind racing. Every corner, every shadow was a threat. The guards were closing in. Then the alarm blared. Ryan's blood ran cold. They knew. He barked into the stolen earpiece. I've got Lily. I need that diversion now. Seconds later, an explosion rocked the outer perimeter of the estate. The security forces scrambled, and Ryan took the chaos as his opportunity. He sprinted towards the exit, the sound of gunfire ringing in his ears. But they weren't going to make this easy. A bullet slammed into his shoulder, and Ryan staggered, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not when his daughter was in his arms. Jason's car screeched to a halt just in time, and Ryan shoved Lily into the back seat, diving in after her. The car sped off, bullets pinging off the metal behind him. Jason took a sharp turn, losing the tail in the labyrinthine streets of Brighton. Ryan's vision blurred, his breath ragged as the adrenaline wore off. His shoulder burned with pain, but he barely registered it. He looked down at Lily. She was safe. That was all that mattered. The safe house was their destination, a nondescript building tucked away from prying eyes. Inside, Hannah Reyes and Vanessa Green were waiting. Lily clung to Ryan, her small hands wrapped tightly around his jacket, like she feared someone would take her away again. "You're safe now, baby," Ryan whispered, brushing a hand through her hair. "No one's ever going to take you from me again." Lily didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just nodded against his chest, exhausted but finally at peace. Jason exchanged a look with Hannah, who crossed her arms, concern etched in her features. "She needs rest, Ryan," she said softly. But Ryan wasn't having it. His voice was firm, quiet. "I don't have time for that." Jason let out a frustrated sigh, but Ryan cut him off. "You don't understand," he said, his tone unwavering. "We find Langley's ledger. It's the key to taking him down. Vanessa, you said Langley kept records. Something physical?" Vanessa hesitated, then took a deep breath. It was a ledger, a book. Langley never trusted electronic records. Too easy to track. Everything he did was in that book. The bribes, the payouts, the deals. It was all in there. Ryan's body stiffened. If they could get their hands on that ledger, Langley's empire would crumble. "Where is it?" Ryan demanded. Vanessa swallowed hard. "I don't know, but if anyone has it, it's Wallace." Ryan's jaw clenched. "Then we find Wallace." Jason hesitated. "You're still bleeding, Ryan. You're barely standing." "I finish what I start," Ryan said, strapping his gun into place. They set out immediately. The night was dark, and Wallace's house was just as cold and imposing as the man who lived inside it. They moved quietly, scaling the fence, disabling alarms with practiced ease. Inside, they were ghosts, moving silently through the halls. They found the study, the place where Wallace kept his most important secrets. Jason rifled through the desk, while Ryan scanned the room for anything unusual. And then he saw it, a locked safe built into the bookshelf. "This is it," Ryan murmured, kneeling. His side screamed in protest, but he pushed through it. Checked the desk for the code. Jason found it quickly, scribbled on a notepad, barely visible after someone had tried to erase it. 6 numbers. Ryan entered the code, and with a soft click, the safe unlocked. Inside was the ledger. Everything Ryan needed to destroy Langley and the corrupt system that had held him down for so long. As Ryan flipped through the pages, his pulse quickened. The bribes, the names, the deals, it was all there. And then, beneath it all, a small flash drive caught his attention. Jason handed it to him, grimly noting the label, "Body cam footage." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He plugged the drive into a laptop, his fingers trembling as the grainy footage loaded. It was the night of Darius Kemp's murder. 2 officers were entering the apartment. Neither of them was Ryan. The realization hit him like a freight train. Wallace had erased it from the department's records, but he had kept a copy for leverage. Ryan clenched his fists. Not yet. Not until Wallace and Langley were finished. And with the ledger in his hands, the hunt for justice had only just begun. Ryan's heart raced, a storm of emotions churning beneath his calm exterior. He had come this far, had bled, fought, and clawed his way out of darkness, but the worst of it was still ahead. In the dimly lit room, every shadow felt like it was closing in on him. Then the voice, cutting through the tension like a blade, stopped him cold. "You really should have stayed in prison." Ryan's eyes snapped to the door as Greg Wallace stepped into the room, gun raised, his demeanor as cold as the gunmetal in his hand. His face was unreadable, his expression that of a man who had already sealed his fate. His words were laced with finality. "Drop the book," Wallace ordered, his voice dripping with contempt. Ryan didn't budge. He stood his ground, his jaw clenched. "You killed Kemp, and you used me to cover your tracks." Wallace's lips curled into a twisted smirk. "That's cute. You think anyone's going to believe a fugitive? You're done, Callaway." Ryan's pulse thundered in his ears. This was it. The man who had framed him, destroyed his life, and endangered his daughter was standing right in front of him. But Ryan couldn't let the anger consume him. Not now. Not when Lily was counting on him. In the blink of an eye, Ryan lunged forward. His body collided with Wallace's before the gunshot rang out, shattering the glass cabinet to his left. The bullet missed its mark, but the fight was on. Pain seared through Ryan's shoulder as the two men crashed into the desk, papers flying like confetti. Wallace, bigger and stronger, seized Ryan's throat, but Ryan's focus was razor-sharp. His knee connected with Wallace's ribs, and the man staggered back. Jason, moving like a shadow, kicked the gun out of Wallace's hand, but the bastard was quick, snatching up a heavy paperweight and swinging it with brutal force. The impact sent a jolt of white-hot pain through Ryan's already injured shoulder, but he pushed through it. With a roar, Ryan grabbed Wallace and slammed his head into the desk. Wallace crumpled, dazed, blood trickling from his forehead. Ryan stood over him, chest heaving, eyes burning with fury. He could end it. This was his chance, but he paused, his voice low and dangerous. "You put my daughter in danger." Wallace could barely speak, his breath ragged, his arrogance fading in the face of defeat. Outside, the sound of sirens wailed. Jason's voice came from behind Ryan. "I called in the cavalry." Ryan nodded, his mind already shifting gears. The book, the footage, the names, it was all in their hands now. Langley's empire was crumbling, and with it, the web of corruption that had ensnared the city. The next day, the city woke to chaos. By the time the sun had risen, the story was all over the news. Hannah Reyes had exposed everything. The body cam footage, the ledger, the names, it all spilled out for the world to see. Langley's empire, bribes, dirty cops, and illegal deals was crumbling, and Brighton PD was on the verge of collapse. The FBI descended like a storm, raiding Langley's estate, Brighton PD, and multiple locations tied to the corruption. One by one, the dominoes began to fall. Greg Wallace tried to escape, but the FBI was already on his trail. They found his abandoned vehicle, traced him to a parking garage, and intercepted him just outside the city. The arrest was swift, and Wallace didn't resist. He knew there was no way out. By noon, he was in federal custody, and the FBI had Langley cornered. The so-called kingpin of Brighton's corruption empire tried to flee in a private helicopter, but the feds had already locked down his flight plan. He was tackled on his front lawn, his expensive suit torn and dirted, as agents read him his rights. Meanwhile, inside Brighton PD, panic spread like wildfire. Officers tried to cover their tracks, but it was too late. The truth had been exposed. Dozens of cops were arrested, their names dragged through the mud. Ryan Callaway had been exonerated. The lies, the framing, the kidnapping of his daughter, it was all revealed. He had been right all along. But for Ryan, the fight wasn't over. He still had to face the courtroom, the moment of truth, when the judge called his name and declared him officially exonerated. It felt like a weight lifted from his shoulders, but the victory wasn't as sweet as he had imagined. His life had been shattered, and no amount of clearing his name could change the past. The courtroom doors swung open, and there she was, Lily. Her small figure stood in the hallway, her eyes wide with hope. The moment their eyes met, she ran toward him. Ryan knelt, arms open, as she crashed into him, her sobs muffled against his chest. "We're going home, baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Lily clung to him, her small hands gripping his jacket like a lifeline. The nightmare was over. Later, they stood at the water's edge, the waves crashing gently against the shore. Lily, free from the terror that had gripped her for so long, ran along the sand, her laughter filling the air like music. Jason and Hannah sat nearby, watching the scene unfold in comfortable silence. It was a moment of peace, a rare gift after everything they had been through. Jason kicked at the sand, breaking the silence. It's strange, isn't it? Knowing it's finally over. Ryan's gaze shifted from the waves to his friends. Is it? Jason rubbed his jaw, contemplating. I guess not. Brighton PD is still cleaning up the mess, and there are others out there. Guys like Langley with power, money, and connections. Ryan nodded. He knew all too well that Langley wasn't the only player in the game. There would always be others. Hannah, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. You could do something about it. The city needs people who won't back down, who won't turn a blind eye. Ryan exhaled, watching Lily splash in the shallows. Maybe, he said after a long pause. But right now, she needs me more. Jason nodded in understanding, and then with a knowing smile asked, So what now? For the first time in his life, Ryan didn't have an answer. There were no cases to solve, no badge to wear, no orders to follow. The city he had once protected had cast him aside, and even after everything, he wasn't sure if he wanted to be a part of it anymore. But as he watched Lily race along the sand, her laughter ringing out, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, he would fight for what was right. And this time, no one would ever take that from him again.